Oh no, savage. What's the first thing to do? This. Let's examine that. Okay, the wife and I have been driving all over town with this. What a wonderful little machine it is. Before I go into what I was looking at, and that was the oil light, I want to tell you some things that I noticed about this car. I haven't taken you for a ride yet. I don't know if it's necessary. I probably will, but I'll have to have my wife with me and the camera at the same time. We went to a car show yesterday, and I took 0 photographs or video. And I just kind of wanted to enjoy myself, and I didn't care about making a video. And I guess I should have. A couple of things that I've noticed about this car is all the stuff that I've done to it, all the wonderful stuff I've done to it, everything I've done to it, yet it is still a 67 Beetle. It will not ride and drive like a modern car. They just don't. My brother told me one time that he thought the car was an honest car, and it is. It's an honest car. I was having trouble with it darting around on the road, and it still does a little bit. So I did things like check my wheel bearings, check my lug nuts, and then Brian told me about the pressure in the tires. And I said, I never checked that. And Dave had conveniently put 45 pounds in each tire, so that was a little excessive. And the rears are supposed to be 27, 28, and the front are only supposed to be 18 or something like that. So I adjusted those values, and with my wife in the passenger seat, it's quite a bit more stable. Also, I'm not used to a swing axle Beetle, so maybe this one's a little different. I think my brother's only had IRS Beetles, so he's kind of wondering about the darting too. But I mean, it's stable and steady and goes down the road straight and all that stuff, and brakes and stops and goes quite fine. So with all that being said, like I said, no matter what you do to it, it's still going to be a 67 Beetle. So let's take a look at a couple of things about this oil light and see if I can't find this problem. This has been a reoccurring problem on this car, and I don't believe it to be mechanical. That is, I believe the engine to be oiling properly. And so let's look at this. And now there's 2 lights on the dash on an old car, and one of them is red and one of them is green on an old car. They're both red on the new car. The green one is the oil light. The red one, the engineers at Volkswagen painted that red for a reason, because the green light can flicker, which is very warm conditions, an engine that's has miles on it, that kind of thing. But it's still acceptable. It's still within the realms of acceptable oil pressure. The red one, however, if that comes on, there's no driving to the shoulder. You turn your car off because probably you shed the belt on your generator or your alternator, and you're no longer cooling the engine, and cooling is most important. Either of them come on. Don't drive to, well, I'm going to drive to a service station to get some oil or something. I ruin your engine doing that. So shut it off first. I know this is probably, well, no kidding, genius to a lot of these people who have owned or own Volkswagens. But for the new crowd, I can just tell you this. In any car, if the oil light comes on or the temperature light comes on, shut the car off and find out what the problem is. Don't drive it to a service station. I don't care if it's a BMW or a motorhome or a John Deere tractor. Yeah, so all those engines need lubrication and cooling. Let's look at our first item on the list. The first item on our list is looks. Okay, and what we're going to do is we're going to look, and we're going to look at that wire, and that wire is attached to our sending unit. So that's the easiest thing to do. Okay, the next thing is we're going to check the oil. The gravy boat is indeed full. Might want to tighten that belt up a little bit too. Let's look at our second. Okay, I should have said this is the third item to check for, is an open loop or a little bit of resistance on that switch right there. So I have one of my contacts from the meter via some alligator clamps and such, and then I have the other one grounded, and we should either have an open loop or just a small amount of resistance. And then when we start the car, since the circuit is open, and we start the car, the oil pressure will close the circuit, and it should turn that to 1. Okay, so this is item number 4 to check, to see if you have a properly operating switch. So we made sure we had oil, and made sure that wire was on first, made sure we had oil, made sure it had an open loop to it, it wasn't closed completely, and then also we're going to check the switch, which would be item 4, and that should change to 1 when I start the vehicle. And indeed it did. So the oil pressure switch is working. There is oil in the crankcase. There's no audible knock or noise. So we have a problem elsewhere. So let's look elsewhere. The next thing I'm going to check is I'm going to put that wire on. So this is going to be number 5. I'm going to put that wire back on, the connection back on, and I'm going to see if that didn't fix it. And I know you might say, hey, wait a minute, you just put the wire back on, and yeah, you never know, it might have been just the connection, you know, was dirty, or I moved the wire was flawed, who knows. Kind of thing that makes you go, look at that, it went out. Let me wiggle that wire around a little bit and see what we get. Okay, because I'm going to leave my ignition on, I'm pulling the wire off my coil, and what that'll do, it won't operate my switch, it won't operate my choke, and it won't send any power to the points. So that way, if the points are closed, it won't burn the points or anything like that. So that's what I do, is I disconnect that if I'm going to turn the ignition on for any amount of time. Here's my deal. It works now. The switch is good, the oil's good, full of oil. But why is that light coming on? Why is that light coming on? Well, what tells me is there's a short between this wire and up in the hood. Somewhere there's a short where it's touching another wire or something. Now, as you remember, during the build of this car, about right here I spliced a bunch of wires. So let's have a look at that. Let's get up underneath the hood. Remember, I do have that piece of wood acting as a cover, and it might be the screws going into it. You don't know. Anything might happen. I had some squeaks up front I was trying to eliminate, and I might have knocked something aside, or something might be touching, or something like that. So let's have a look at that, and it's probably under the hood. Something come close or is touching that and grounding it, turning the light on. So let's have a look. Okay, now we can do is we can check that wire and see exactly if there's any, if the wire itself is touching a ground or is grounded somewhere along the way out back. If you look at this, it does look like quite a mess, but I can see right here my wire, and nothing's touching the metal, nothing's grounding it. I can see quite plainly it going into this loom. There is a wire attached to it right here, but that, if you remember, was a piece of the original wire that is heat shrunk to it to let you know what the original wire color was. So we're going to check that wire. I have the ignition on. My light is lit up. I'm going to disconnect the sending unit, the wire. Now we can check that. And what we can do is pull that out. Get your light off there. And we are going to take our meter, and the meter says 1, and when we touch both of them together, it's a completed circuit, open, completed circuit. Okay, so what we want to do is we want to take this wire, and we will have it on ohms, and plug it in there, and then we'll touch a ground and see what happens. Okay. Wiggle some wires and stuff and see if that changes. Nothing changes. Okay, that's fine. Alright, now, this is telling me something. Alright? And what it's telling me is it's telling me, first thing, let me tell you this. I was very careful with my wiring. When I spliced these wires, I soldered them, and I used heat shrink tape, double and triple in some cases. It's possible, but it's not probable, that my wire from here to the back of the car is grounding out anywhere, turning my light on. It's possible, but it's not probable. Okay. And what that tells me is I either have an actual problem with the car, which I don't think I do, or I have an intermittent problem with the switch, the pressure switch, or the oil relief valves. Now, when I'm running the engine, if the oil relief valve stuck, you would audibly hear it, and I'm not hearing it. It would get hot, and it's not getting hot. It runs fine. Every time I check it, it has pressure. We have no problem there. What I'm thinking, it's a switch. It's the pressure switch back there. That's an aftermarket from O'Reilly's, I believe. So we'll have to keep an eye on that and look. And there is one way to fix that, And the book shows, and I will show you just slightly in a minute. Okay, let me show you what the book says that you can do. You must remember that this is with factory parts. Factory parts. Okay, and it says that you need to check the bulb, and if the bulb doesn't light up, replace the bulb, and then ground the wire, and if the wire doesn't light the bulb, then it's the wiring. And if everything lights the bulb, then you need to check the switch, the pressure switch, and it might have some crud in the orifice. However, you must understand that that is with a factory switch, and I do not have a factory switch. I have a Chinese switch. So yeah, that's what I'm thinking. What I'm going to do is I'm going to run a little fail-safe, just like it says here, and it shows, I think this is in the orange book on page, this is the orange book on page 16 in the engine, and it says that you can install a gauge. So I'm going to find a decent gauge. That gauge I have, the little gauge that I had, it's very crappy. I'm seeing if I can find a little bit better gauge, an oil pressure gauge, and I'll have a pipe coming out of there, an oil pressure gauge, and a oil sensing unit screwed into it. So that shouldn't be a big deal, and we'll do that. Maybe I'll show you how to do that on the next one. And there you go. So that is in the book. But what I want to tell you, the most important thing to do is if your lights come on, it's most important that you shut the car off. Yeah, check your belt for your generator, and don't run the car if the light on the generators come on, or the light on the oil has come on. Well, that wraps it up for this one. I hope that's been informative, and my light problem is not on anymore. So I don't think it's the wiring. I think it's probably the switch. But I'm going to put a gauge in there, and if that light comes on, I can go back and look at the gauge real quick and say, yeah, the gauge works, and it's not a relief valve problem. So remember, that engine is set under a workbench for 15 years, so, and I didn't take them out yet to ungum them. Maybe I ought to do that too. Anyways, all right. Hope you've learned something. I have too. And we'll see you on the next one. All right. See you later. Bye.